Good morning, Gen Rinpoche. Thank you for continuing to teach on this very important text. And good morning, Katrina Brooks. We're so fortunate to have such a capable translator. And welcome to everyone online. Our apologies for the technical delays. We're happy that you can join us this morning. So we'll begin with some preliminary prayers, and you'll find a link to those prayers in the chat box. To the teacher endowed, transcendent destroyer, the oneless gone, the foe destroyer, completely and fully awakened one, perfect in knowledge and good conduct, one gone to bliss, nor the world's supreme guide to beings to be tamed. Teacher of gods and humans, to you, the Buddha endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. When, O supreme among humans, you were born on this earth, you paced 7 strides and said, I am supreme in this world. To you who are wise, then I bow. With pure bodies, form supremely fine, wisdom ocean like a golden mountain, fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner of the best, supreme guide, to you I bow. With the supreme signs, face like a spotless moon, color like gold, to you I bow. You are immaculate, the 3 worlds are not, just one, to you I bow. Great compassionate protector, all-knowing teacher, through purity, freeing from attachment, through virtue, freeing from the lower realms, unique, supreme, ultimate reality, to the Dharma that is peace I bow. Having freed themselves, showing the path to freedom too, well established in the trainings, the holy field endowed with good qualities, to the Sangha I bow. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind completely, this is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a mirage, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop, a dew, a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud, see conditioned things as such. Through this merit may sentient beings attain the state of all seeing, subdue the foe of faults, and be delivered from the ocean of cyclic existence perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. This ground anointed with perfume, flowers strewn Mount Meru, land, sun, and moon, imagined as a Buddha land and offered to you, may all beings enjoy this pure land. Venerable holy gurus, in the space of your truth body, from billowing clouds of your wisdom and love, let fall the rain of the profound and extensive Dharma, in whatever form is suitable for subduing sentient beings. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niyatayami. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhist, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhist, the Dharma, Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create, by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings.
Hoya genla diksha.
Disona.
Dikson.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, ne Samalia. Kingdombuchi that's Samalia. Not to the last.
So good morning to everybody, Kimbo Tutin children and everybody there.
Oh yeah. That day I'm going to guess it's in Bushawale soon, Jujulerba. Then June the neighbor Shindu cars. Give you turn to Tobar Chubalas. Getting Dilla Pembo Madruna, Chindi Yandan Jovakala Yurus. Oh, she's some Bataro. Marado Tanda Milito Devate. Chujubalia Mekumba Metelwa. Gedan Trevasura. When it tingy Randa Shell and Song with a tingy Sama Jordan Gangi, Milu Keversion, the Usungura. Oh, Tenju din a never Shindukas. Then a Hajang never Shinduka is. Kares net the Kutuba Shinduka is Ugudwa. Yeah, teach you Lana.
So to begin with the words of the master Shantideva, he says that this leisure and endowment, which are so difficult to obtain, have been acquired, and they bring about the welfare of the world. If one fails to take this favorable opportunity into consideration, how could this occasion occur again? So right now we have this precious human life. We are free from the kind of 8 states that are lacking freedom to be able to practice the Dharma. And we also have this kind of special life, which has all of the endowments from our own side and from that of others to be able to apply ourselves to the Dharma. So this is something which is extremely difficult to obtain. And we can look at that from different angles, but it's extremely difficult to find because the causes that create such a life are very difficult to acquire.
Oh yeah. That Deva should Deva tell me Deva tell it, yes, you do. Really give a nature to Delo Yomar, Comba Yomar, Kugabi Yomar, Sungara. Or Dikaris Nagara Tundru. Marado Tonde Tundru Chilke de Yona. And it should trouble Kugabi Yomara. Tundru Chera. Yeah. Tundru Chineko Caso Chilla Chip Sawada. Noah. Many shangy question to chip to Mambo Chinya de Maduchi. Chug some time Kugabi Yomara. Oh, dinner she died, you don't know Chia. Say to me, never says a bear. They can't come in on the chute and get you. Ya church about Tindre Coco Omardo. Kita Sigra. O dinner she, Sawada, Segbada, Tangwada, Segbe to me, Shachimbo, two Kundin Yonkonge, Yawanda, which will get the Yona. Yako church about Yakumbam, Terra Kugabi Omarwa. O dinner she, Sungamda, Sume Bella. Sitting bull set in the order. Dingy Tembushita troop. And it's Tarwa Torek Lamla, Juma de Vicha. Yeah, had sitting Buddhist case on us someday. She burned up Tindelia. Tambu Kidu Zangachi case on some such. And then you borrow saw Megan so the Stegora. I shiver Tawan and Mabadin, you might bet. And it's Chivalamudelianchi children, but a hawkwash mother mero. Just a hot sitting Bunam secure us. Oh, do Hatcherimbo, Dani, Sudan, Sumi, sitting in the temple should have from the city of Tindeli care or what is also secure to Sukanga, Mekumba should have a year and bush tene, stinging or what, Samba Tembo, Rachete, de Mado, Katie, Mixi Tarwatam, the Chibatria Yomarwa. The nation debe hat in the Hinako, Nami Chidachun, Nambarian, so that he wrote a tender for young Chune. Churchube Kuga Mes, Tezukanga, Mekumbe ne in Sumudo. Mekumbe ne, she mima ibe Mekumbe ne, she is with all the ropes sooner.
So these 8 states of freedom, if we don't have that kind of leisure or freedom, we're unable to practice the Dharma. So think if you were to be born as an animal, the life of an animal involves really having to eat other animals or be eaten by others, trying to just to stay alive, being forced to work for others and so forth. And you don't have the kind of freedom to be able to engage in the Dharma. Or if you were born as a hungry ghost, as a preta, your whole life is spent just trying to find food and drink, just trying to have enough sustenance. You don't have the ability to think of Dharma. Or if you're born in one of the hells where you're constantly subjected to burning and sort of a torture almost, you don't have the kind of leisure to think of the Dharma as long as you are subjected to such heinous kind of torture. And on the other hand, if you are born as a being like a long-lived God, or say in the higher sort of meditative concentrations, you have a really stable kind of life. Like say you have attained the 4th concentration, the 4th meditative concentration, one will be in this kind of meditative equipoise, this sort of non-conceptual, non-thinking kind of meditative equipoise for a very long time. And although that is quite stable, there's no opportunity, no thought of the Dharma at all. One has this kind of mental stability and remains in a sort of meditative equipoise, but there are no virtuous thoughts in terms of striving for liberation or the state of omniscience. And you have the kind of state of a long-lived God. Again, it's a long life where they're enjoying all kinds of indulgences of the senses, surrounded by those kinds of enjoyments and distracted by that. Again, no one in that kind of rebirth has the thought of engaging in Dharma. So those are the 4 sort of non-human states of lacking leisure, and they're the 4 human states that lack leisure.
Oh yeah, tenia mili kiba inaya siyo no. Mili kiba inaya ko oh tenia yu tagob to kiba se sanje ki chu mebe kelon pamata kini kinyi pamalo soba. Oh tenia mesa ki yu le kina yu tagob sigo oh yu tagob to kiba se. Ani yachi wombu matama to tenia kiba inaya roa kuba baso yala masama tenia church-ishin yamba noto mirunga tinde kenero. Ani ya mi loda chen kyanga chi yo mare le chumde yo mare rawa ani sanje da chue la sopa kinde kaya yo mare se no. Tanda dikwa chena da kyo chena debu yaga da to yo mare se wa tinde chi to wa. O tini ya chawa chuso ma wala sopa. O tinde likiwa yena ya mili kena ya o chutuba chutube tingi sangi omarwa. Waya tishidi chilamna. Tindel majiba sonda ngarazo chutubala telware kombare. Tindel keba ini chutubala meteware songa. Yeah.
So even if you are born as a human, there are kinds of situations in which you don't have the freedom or leisure to practice the Dharma. Like if one is born in a really remote area, sort of hinterland, where there is no trace of the Buddha Dharma, there isn't a kind of 4-fold Sangha with monks and nuns and so forth, one doesn't have the opportunity to practice that. You haven't encountered that. Or if you are born in a situation where you are lacking the kind of faculties, being deaf or having other kinds of obstacles to actually engaging with the Dharma, those kinds of births are really unsuitable for being considered a kind of state to practice the Dharma. Or if one has really strong wrong views, like say you don't believe in past and future lives, or you don't believe in karma, cause and effect, if one makes those kinds of assertions, like thinking, oh, there is no Buddha, there is no Dharma, there is no possibility that virtuous activities will lead to good results, that is not a situation in which you have the leisure, the freedom to practice the Dharma. And so we should recognize that these kinds of states, we have avoided that, even though those are human rebirths. They are not the kind of rebirth that allows us to practice the Dharma. So we should recognize that right now we don't have that. We have the kind of freedom to be able to practice the Dharma, having all of those kinds of conditions.
Oh yeah. Atile tewa jesu do. Tindel kebe ne ngazu chutubala kumba mere tewa mere kugabyo mara. Tindel Maji Tanda Chuguena, Sosunguna Chuguena, Tinjin of Ganga Chade Dua, Kukam Dua, or Tindil gave a resum order. Dawa Jas. Then a Jorba choose. This time my ba Chu Drubala Tinji, changing when a Sankuba, the Rangi when a Sankuba, Ganga Chade or resum order. Shanjurnas, Ranjurnas, or Tindil Jorba Chusungda, Danjurki, Church of Gas. Or Tilakandi Karsovers. Sanje Shanjo said Sanje Chandas, Sanje gave a mambo so son and it, the Bullen Lichene, those dealing about the Sanchene, Tendichon Yorto, Sanje Chandas. Tamju Dase, Sanje Pen, Sanje Chusum, but Sanje Yendu, and it Jamjala Soba, or the Tezuge, Chusumbola Soba Tezu, younger Sanje Chunda, Tamju Dase. Temba net answer, Sanjay choose somebody nashi, net Tarvada Tamja Kimba Truveta, Rondo Lamikova Truvegi, India Nene, Tarba Kova told the bottle to do you about us and Yordo. Temba net, Mania Bashita, the net, or rest, Temba. The Jason Juba should oh, Tende Temba never to the Kamiata Chene, oh, Sosu Changina, did the be your necula get from good to us and get to and do awesome. The Jason Juba. Temba neta teaching Jews, or the Shanjurna said, teaching Shan, telling Jungachi, come here, the Chesan Chukura, Shanda Suchi, Temba Chesan Junga Manor, Anchibu Yomardo, till a Shanjurna, Shangun and Sankuve, Tingi, or the Kanga Sandi of Asungdo, yeah.
So we have been born in a state where we have the kind of freedom. We aren't in those 8 states that lack freedom. So we have this kind of opportunity, this leisure or freedom on our hands. And not only that, but we have all of the kinds of conducive conditions that are necessary to be able to practice the Dharma. So we have those from our own side and from the side of others. So particularly regarding like sort of from the side of others, the Buddha has come into the world. So the Buddha, accumulating merit for many, many eons, demonstrated, showed us, manifested Buddhahood here. And not only that, but the Buddha taught the holy Dharma. The Buddha gave these kinds of instructions that allow others to be able to practice a similar path, teaching the various disciples and that are the various types of disciples. And not only did the Buddha teach, but the teachings remain. We have the kinds of teachings that tell us how to reach liberation and omniscience, the kind of path that we need to take in order to gain a good rebirth, and so forth. And not only do the teachings remain, but we can't sort of practice in isolation just by ourselves, but there are those that follow after the teachings. We have those that we can emulate, that we can also strive to be like. We have those that support those who are following the teachings. And in this way, we have all of the kinds of conducive conditions related to others that allow us to really have this opportunity to practice.
Oh, yeah. Ranjurnas, Rangwina Sanguba, Linga Sanguara, Church of Betingi. Minis, Soso Miliki, Tandunda Tindi Mati, Sitanda Milikini, Chishena, Cotton getting this getty ordo. Minis, you also give us. Miliki was a mind by you, Sanjay Tembata Sagi, Rawa, Gelon Pamala Soba, Kenny Pamala Soba, Sanjay Chu Sumbe Tembata, you say you lick yourself. You also give us, that's you. Darsa you give us, you also give us. Mini Wambo chance. Che Shenge Yuna, so Wambo Matama, now Dansebo Amjo and Bandabata Chinde, Come to go Kubando, Tinde Kenamandirto, Tindel Maki, many union Wambo chance. Ganga Sande, you get your share no go to get in the get your order. Letter my law say, Saminga, Passeba, Maseba, Soba, Roa, Tinde Saminga, Ranga Cheva, Michelle, Chedu Chuba. Tende Chevaneko, let Sabuji San in it, Tende Yomada, Tende Maimba, Tende Tiba Chimbasan never said. Mini Yombosan, Leta Malo, Nella Dese, and it's Sanjay Sumbe, Gawa Roa, Denisum said, Leta Malo, Nella Des, Denisum Nella Debasura, Dingy Come in and Shirab Yulava in and shenla tsoa pambe tsudumi nanda, o tesu tembe, rawa, nondo lami kobanda tarba tupchiki tab tembe, sangbe choba tembe, tene sumla soba tesu la siwa no. Mini yombo sa leta malo nela tes, o ti tembe, ne sam shi tene te dala teba yobas. O leta malo nela tes, te rangjo ngas, te ngarazu kanga chande yorwa, ya tish.
So not only do we have those kinds of conducive conditions that relate to others, but from our own side, there are the 5 sort of conditions that we need to have. The first is being born a human. Again, if we were born as an animal or something, we would not be able to practice the Dharma. And we have been born in a central land, meaning a land in which the Buddha's teachings have spread, in which there is the kind of 4-fold Sangha of novice monks and nuns and fully ordained monks and nuns. And we have the kind of faculties, the capacity to be able to learn and study and meditate on the Dharma. If we lacked such faculties in any sort of way, we, again, would not have this kind of rebirth. And we are not thus in a sort of situation where we have committed in a particularly egregious kind of negativity, like the 5 non-virtues of immediate retribution that lead to a bad rebirth without any bardo. We haven't committed such really heinous acts. And we also have the kind of, again, this sort of we're abiding in the teachings, as in we are in a place where the 3 baskets remain. We have the ability to engage with the teachings on meditative stabilization and wisdom and the kind of ethical conduct of abandoning harm to others and so forth. So because we have, again, we should reflect on the fact that we have all of these conducive conditions that are necessary to be able to practice Dharma.
Oh yeah. Tatina nengazu sanje tochi tenlongo suchambata, sanje tanyen de chu sombate zu tandara yo mardo. Ina tedan ko tingo sumatsana tedada ches timba asam, tanda chu songwe tanga oto zu yosa, ches timba san tanda, dewa gedan jorwa chude, o dini masame banga zu sande yore songora. Yanjun dini se, dewa gedan, chu chu bala randa shenla sangko ben jorwa chu. Tunjin jorbachu, tenjun dini, nibar shindu ka ase. O dinde milu di toya pe, kumambu ju sanero, shenla tsawa pangbala soba, yani chimba tangwala soba, roa, yani sanje temba dan jawam tetan drawa ibe malam debala soba, kumambu ju sane, yani yongu yordon, tenjun dini nibar shindu ka ase. O tindi ko ngaranju milu di, chita chene ko tunge mambu yosa, nirwa, tunge mambu nyan denge rang nyonge shenye tunge nyon denge titi kigo arda. Ina la tosu ina dola ritu sero tan samde tambu nipa tosu la tosu pe pesum soba ne lu longju pesum soba shibit kete yore chere. Ina ya la tosu ya shiga lamutuli ya kyo maungba na ya ane tenjo ki milu tobar yurche yese malam kyagu yusere. Karesne hala nami chidara chene ko yang goko ne che chuge tu yong yo marwa mili ke vene ko ne da lu do long jo so wa na shi yo mar tu nge yirang shin che de ngo so ko che le shu ni sam tang gen shin na tu nge nyong de ge mang bu ngu sum thon ya yo re rang ge tu nge nyong de yo re de le sam ta na nge jung gu sam ko de ge ko ge yo ro nami chida chu su ta te ro de cha lo so wa la pe go ko da ra che ne tu nge thon ya me na 아니 땡게 말와시다 하토서 야 벤지 표성 속바다 강가 여나 쳐줘발이야 아니 민중세로 다 예일단이지 소소라 동해 중에 생기 동해 중에 텐데 최그 그거 상부 당부대 용기 엄마와 건설 맞는데 대신게 와도 건설가 되는데 그 마음바나 최더니 대원들이 벌써 텐도 밀게 와 줄지에서 말함다고요 그거 상부 쉬지 와라 Tindu ngarazo kiwe ngoe chane lu pe lana shingi oji rangshin chanda sela soba ni lai tujis lu le timdu ya tindu pisum soba yore te yina ya hanam jijang ngarazo membe ani tenju milu di topde yuja di pe nye kawa da zachi mu sungure sungudwa.
So even though we aren't alive at the time of the Buddha, when he came to Bodh Gaya and demonstrated enlightenment, we have the kinds of conditions that are similar to that. We have those that still follow after the Buddha's teachings and so forth. And so we have something that is really extremely precious. Again, this, as this verse says, and we see, this is a kind of rebirth that is extremely difficult to find. And this is due to the fact that we have to accumulate so many causes. We have to create so many causes in order to have this type of life. We have to engage in ethical conduct where we give up harming others. We need to engage in generosity. We need to have made the kind of stainless prayers that lead to such a rebirth. And so here, although we can think about in general a human life and the kind of rebirth that we have taken, we have to experience so much suffering on the basis of this body that we have taken up. It really is something where we have to experience a great deal of suffering. But when we look at this in comparison to, say, taking birth in a heavenly realm, being born as like a long-lived God, all of those things that they have that are seemingly so excellent, the kind of excellent abode and so forth, really, although they enjoy that throughout their life, at the time of death, they see that they are going to have to take another rebirth. And a lot of them make a kind of prayer to be born as a human, because the special sort of quality of being born as a human is that we see suffering. We are actually able to recognize this. We ourselves experience suffering and we see it in others. And therefore, we have the chance to develop a kind of renunciation, to be able to directly confront the causes of that suffering and so forth. Whereas someone that has been born in those upper realms, they have this kind of excellent wealth and enjoyment, and they spend their life enjoying those things. They don't have the chance or the thought of really renunciation or of pursuing the Dharma. And so although those heavenly beings may have bodies in the nature of light, and we think like, oh, they're enjoying this wonderful nectar and these great enjoyments throughout their whole life, to have the experience of that is actually something that is a distraction from the Dharma. The kind of life that we have, even though it involves suffering, allows us to pursue the Dharma in a way that such a higher rebirth would not.
Oh yeah. 연준되는 예와 기부 전도 도와 주발라시. 다 다른 나라들로 고급 소속이야 교와 침을 벤제게 뭔도 하다 미 고바 좀네 땡기 자와 초도 주발을 소바 땡지 좀네 두개 그 고급 요아래 선거라. 기부 전도베 아니 고급 요아를 네바 요아실 게데 요아래 기부 전도 도와 주발라시. 기부 전도 가르 센데치부 기부 전도 말어. Sende 동해 매여다 대화답시 줍지 매직게야데 그 던들라요 요래서 미다 티모아데서라 던두 고라조치 사회 통해 쯔제 요래 아니 강에서야 강요요 지지 덮시 고라 빠져 지요라 고라 교와데 고 가리네 파 게토버지 지거도 어디 던들라요 요래서 내가 좀 미켜주게 말했어 근데 그 기부 던두 도와줘 교 침을 펜제 소소 던다 주에 삼을 코르트 바치고 아레스 센데점 계속 쳐봐도 교 매지컬 로카제네 디바도 벤주 표성 쳐봐로 세고 내면에서 표성 쳐봐 대장장은 거고 뒤에 던달에 디바사 텐데 시대다 네 라랴 야라서 단다 밀리 토베 되냐와 예다 던두 망보치리 깨깨깨깨깨 네 차르 치칼리칼리 kalé mambu si kamne tare chik thare re songu ara ne songu tungele thane mi lu kebar chen de to re se jwa tande tama kalé mambu kamne to ya de tare kugab delia yangya yabu chene chima mao bana nge son sungla so wa te zula dro me go ba chi so ma do na la ya yangya pa lo ndo ye nge so le cha yo de pesem jobo so li ya me ba songe kugab me ba songe o tinde chi ti inde 교와 침을 벤저 하다 미고바 대야 코아저 마이바 타르베네 툭퉁게 대야 라치부 타르와 마이바 심제 탐제게 툭퉁게 진대 영야 장릉부 삼로다 야침부 삼로다 진대 다다다다르 국업을 섭소 치마도 양양마로 마루스 동해 양양양 점버를 시에 정가나 대대 동해냐 지터드자 국업을 말씀비제 양파 양양로 전에 대방보라 진짜 마요 제쳐고래 선거라 되는데 교와치마 하다 미고마 rimji gyuni tarvada tamje kimbo tuktuba chegures. Titundala tangbudiliya, kyawa chimalada milikiyage tabshi kari cheguresena, lunga yusumgi kone migiwa chus tam yunga jusigiwa. Ti shi ke chembura, ti tangbuna ke chembura. O shenliya sawa chena shenla tunga yungure esam, rāla chikpa re sam, rāla tunga yungu duwas, tina shenla tunga yungu re sam, tse kune lāne shenla tsawa bangura. Kimla tugu re samsa, pulisi semburi samsa, tere chene ko te samge tembu marwa. O midale nugu re samsa tsawa yo na, kadu yina ko kukab chuna ya kukab lengi marwa. O tindu ko tse shi suni, shenla tunga chichuna, rāla chikpa re shenla tunga ngara, rangi ngune shenla tunga chuna dhima re samne. Tsawa pangbade, luji kone so cheba, machimba le mesamba cheba, longirwa. Nga kone tsu chama chikzu, yeji kone namse nesim logdala soba, shenla tsewe risu kebe kunlung mewa, tiye kone kunlung kone lan lunga ge, tsawa meche bachi tambu chene, kiawa chima lada mii koban toba chi ngeba do chegu re se. Tenga tsen dele tikwa masakba tsa mayimba, kiawa nga mabu sa cheba, tazule shakba che, 동안 샤고라 소바 차차와라 소바 딕샤체 겨바체 어 텐데체니 겨치마 사단 모두 라메 고바 줍투메게 단단하신 추체바티 균트는 조tum게게 땡 개발자지 토바치기 삼알레탄다 당부티 티레도 기부충어색으로 안 남긴가죠 당부티 티면은 시고란 tor사로 네 타르와 탐제 캠버시라 삼로 도야고를 내요 말로 야 티지라나
So this kind of opportunity that we have right now is a great opportunity. As it says in this verse by Shantideva, we have the chance to bring about the welfare of the world. And so here, this is referring to the fact that we can bring about our own welfare in terms of gaining a good rebirth and eventually liberation in the state of omniscience. But when we talk about the welfare of the world, we're not just talking about this life. Like, to be able to sustain ourselves for as many years as we stay alive is not the welfare of the world. I mean, that is something that even animals are able to do. Animals and other types of beings are able to find enough food and drink to sustain themselves for the course of this life. That's not what we're talking about in terms of the welfare of the world, but we're talking about a kind of stable, lasting, definite happiness. We're talking about being able to gain that kind of freedom. And so here, when we talk about the sort of bringing about the welfare of the world and the opportunity that we have right now, again, we need to remember that it took so much effort to get this kind of life that we have right now. We must have created many good causes in order to have this sort of life. And if we just kind of let it go to waste, if we don't use it at the very least in order to continue on this path, to be able to continue with a good rebirth, then that's quite unfortunate. That's quite a loss. I mean, that's really a sad kind of outcome. And so we don't really just want to get, though, a good rebirth as a human or a god, but we recognize that we want a definite freedom from this cycle of suffering. And thinking beyond that, it's not just for ourselves, but also for all other sentient beings. So here, these kinds of thoughts are the welfare of the world, not just sort of continuing within this prison of samsara, not ever wanting to get out. But we have to begin, the sort of foundation of all of this is to be able to have a good rebirth in the future. And so the very important foundation is ethical conduct. That means abandoning any kind of harm to others with our body, speech, and mind. And so we shouldn't see this as something like dismiss it as being small or unimportant, but really giving up harming others. And this ethical conduct is the foundation for everything that comes later. And we're not doing this out of a sense of like, oh, well, the police might catch me, I might get in trouble with the law if I hurt somebody, but rather it's out of a sense of love, of recognizing that this other being experiences suffering. I don't want to create suffering for them. They want happiness just like I do. And so this is the kind of attitude that we need to cultivate in order to really genuinely develop this kind of ethical conduct that gives up killing and stealing and sexual misconduct and those kinds of non-virtues of speech, of harsh speech and lying and divisive speech and gossip, and those of mind, of covetousness and malice and wrong view. This is the foundation upon which we can definitely ensure that we have another good rebirth. And so with that as a foundation, we also have to recognize that not only do we want to avoid non-virtues in this life, but we have definitely done non-virtuous actions in the past. And therefore, we should make an effort at purification, at getting rid of those kinds of negativities, and engage in the kind of positive actions of prostrations and offerings and those sorts of virtues that will allow us to have this kind of continuity of a good rebirth in the future. This we often call the practice of this being of small scope, but it's really the basis, the foundation upon which everything else comes. So we shouldn't dismiss this or look down upon it.
Oh yeah. That give you to toba chubala, that tambo shirabati. The Mundulami Kova, church to be 10 keversion. Tobarcha the restaurant, dear church and then Tandang church, Chiviana, she take troop to get a milli, bunch about church of 17 year, dear Tondala, Levacher to Tondatu, the Tambu restaurant. No, that till a chair, make you a chupa, Kawachu to Roa, and it's you can do another shop and make you a shabache. or condition had me go bunch of top in Ayadra. That you go quality on me go at the quality to make your own sincere. Yes, only 30 could let me go at the Sambure, the Jupurete, in a co me currently to me Mambuyore. So now Yambetati, good courage and younger sinner. Now Yambanga round at some local. Sometimes I'm doing a shoot somebody order. Say round so good that same that so on the shit as well at 10, so well at 10 part on any. There's a legacy to target Chavaches and get your mother. There is one Chagachini Rise, Homara. Target should be Tamjet in the Roa, Tension Revolution, Mambuji so, Telepa, Tanya Tani. Tezu chashe tezu dashi tezu lega chidu no koran chawa chebores tene ta wa zam sha gu yora kina ngara zu samlo kyundil karyo sne nga se rawa chik chi zugu zu se chi yo so sobu pasha sem pasha chwa pasha ne tanda chi lo su yo nan ru sha gu o tende ngan zin de pa chor tangura thongme marik ba se gu atlia 다게 소소티 간데 엠바 소소 야부 신게 엄마를 친줄로도 삼고 와라 그 소소도 소소 야부지 하고 하셔버려 소소 뭐 간데 엠바데스 남주 간조가 가서 라와시고 삼다 아니 가이스 아니 간조세 콘조스체 다쇼도 현저 처럼 쉬어서라 대사지나 네게 다티 견조르다 파시 수시체 요트세제 다리제로 아니 산잠데 인데 사실 뒤전에 레레레 거시켜주면서 산잠제시라 문에서는 네가 전불이나 밀ike서로 강가를 사제 강가 투모도 왕사를 마도 개요 말아 이내 가라서 자리 잡자 사제 된다리야 미 동전 몸과 몸을 세리 또 고도 서티 강가 난질이 되는 거라 나조세 나조 장장 나조 세들 심제 강가 출래 거라 라데 지고 나조 강가 대화들 동에 메데바리 지바리 삼사촌에 야가도 초로 지스 로 김자리가 주를 진시 소티 장장식시 야텔레체는 롱버럽 강우 조세도시 야 롱버 계급에서 야 줄루에서로 딱초다 현저 숙심부서도 강감미 찍고의 삼상 나라주나시 건조 삼로 요래 대완들을 동하면 찍고를 삼로 찍으면 와 그저 가리는 이 삼사도 와 어디 매서 보라 다음에 뭔가 말이 빠세 전달을 다음에 봐서 나가 삼로 숙소다 다 고대셔내라 아니 나저 건조세 차다 일이 차다 지야게 와 차바데 여나 아니 거로 연구를 현재는 나다 저세디요나 대줄은 내가 지었다 대줄은 미팅받으려는 거로 연구도 좋아돼 연구하라 대 차다하게 레서도 아니 코야마도 요 말어 양 밀리케나 레상부선 밀리케 요데데 달레 다 녀모게 와게 레사네 코알로 코르마고 바시고 삼거래 Leda Nyumanga Rawameba Jawaji Lang, Yan Dishi, Yan Langche, Social Rawameba, Leda Nyumba Wangi, Kumbu Dolin Cheko, Tarwachi Cheko, some. Ditanda Judy Carasana, and then something on this Shukchimbu Machia, and then Chagna, Ganzo Konzo, Chagna Shukchimbu, Ganjan and Yorta, Kondo Yorta, Najan Yorta, Trado Yorta, Yomo, the Zurich to Kanga, Rebet and Papane. The Tutawan and Mavason and call a Cormago Chico Samsa. Give it on that Nibatera. Or Tinder some Tachim Buyum some Tangura. Tandang Tinder took my Tinder Kawayan some Tandang and Tugu my Tinder Chituba chicken, some Kalikali, some Lotanji Rimbet and the chicken, some Jayirim some Tangura. Then I'm going to say, Lojo Shinga, ABCD Shinga, Matoshingi Marina, Nachima, Kabat and the chicken, some Shayadua. Chutanda ABCD Shingi Yomara, Tinder Conducive to say Yomara, Komaumba, Rimbe, Yajetan Sigora, Tangazo Tarba Toba Chicken, Sanje Yukova Toba Chicken, Message Joa Zoya Yomara, Nazo Terva, Kishipune, Pumbu Donation over Mado Dagi, Jundi, Jiggy, Dede Yora, or Tinder Yerimbo Samlata, Kugabi, Tuju Mambo Yora, Tanga Samlutana. Never don't get in the shit of a chicken, some meal shower. What in the give you to do, say, never tell a tarwa tobacco. You let and Yomogo and the less on it, you want to do a Kichichimagovich. Do I read to a Pumbu Dolin Chimago? Yomo says, not tarba de Shanta Kamara. Conduso, KML, Najato, Trado KML, something around and be something the Mavishas and Tarvatora. Tanda nibate tirwa o tende je toba chagin some semda chene yere bus tiju bo mangu keji o mara maumbar o tiji shemna ya.
So that kind of foundation, the practice of the being of small scope, of continually getting a good basis, the special kind of basis to be able to practice the Dharma, we need to be able to continuously take rebirth as a human or a god, have that kind of basis in order to be able to continue along this path. So abandoning the 10 non-virtues and engaging in the 10 virtues in order to gain that, that's the first kind of foundation for this. But then we see that even if you take rebirth as a human, this is in the nature of suffering. This human life, even though we consider it precious for many reasons, is still in the nature of suffering. And really, this is when we look at, well, why is it that we suffer? What is the root of this suffering? We have this kind of thought of I. We have this sense that there is an autonomous, this sort of solid, real I that somehow functions independently of our various aggregates, like as if we were to set aside each of our various aggregates, we could find something that was that I, but really there's nothing to be found. We have this sort of sense of an I that's really existent, but yet when we try to search for that thing, that I as it appears to us, the self as it appears to us, we can see that it's actually something that is dependently originated, dependently designated. We have this kind of sense that within our aggregates, there is something that is like solid and real, that has this kind of independence or autonomous, that if we were to set aside our form and our feelings and our consciousness and so forth, there would be this I or this self that we could find, that we could point to, but it doesn't actually exist in that way. And so we have, since beginningless time, had this kind of fundamental ignorance, and we need to investigate the nature of this mind, look at how it is that this occurs. We have this sense of an I, and from that sense of I and me and mine, there's a sort of my side and then the other side. There becomes this sort of us and them, and we like to draw borders in all sorts of different ways, not just the sort of borders between countries where we get down to like even the particles, this is us and this is them, but we do this in all sorts of different ways, whether it's like our town versus their town, our country versus their country, our religious tradition versus their religious tradition. We have this kind of sense that there's an us and a them, and instead of recognizing that we are all human, we all want to have happiness and we all don't want to suffer, really, that we're all sentient beings, beings. We don't think about that, but rather think about our various divisions, holding to this idea of I and mine, and that's the other side. We don't recognize our kind of shared humanity. And so when we are in the control of that, we have this kind of attachment to the side of ours and an aversion, a hatred for the other. At this level of thinking, this level of the medium scope, we recognize the fault of this and try to begin to reduce that kind of strong clinging and attachment to mine and my side, and aversion, hatred, anger for the other. So long as we have that sense of I and attachment to the mine, we're going to have a kind of anger or hatred for that which is seen as threatening to that. And so here, recognizing this kind of process by which, when we are under the control of our delusions, our afflictions, we then engage in various actions, karma, that then leads to this cycle of uncontrolled rebirth, wherein we have to take up aggregates and cast them off again and again in this kind of uncontrolled series. So when we are able to reduce the force of our afflictions, reduce that grasping at an I, we can reduce all of the kind of attachment and jealousy and pride and anger and hatred, all of our afflictions that come from this. So this is the medium level of contemplation, of wanting to gain liberation, wanting to gain a kind of freedom from that our various afflictions, recognizing that the extinction of our afflictions, that kind of freedom, that liberation is possible if we remove all of those kinds of things that cause it. And this is really, we need to, again, have a sort of vast, expansive, long-reaching kind of thinking. This is something that happens in stages. Like, for example, when a little kid is first learning to read, they don't even have maybe a knowledge of the letters yet, but they say, oh, I'm going to become this great scholar. They're setting that as the long-term goal, but there's a lot that has to be learned in between there. And so too, we should recognize that we've been taking rebirth continuously, and there's no end to that kind of process unless we make an effort to end that. And so while these kinds of goals like liberation and omniscience, the state of Buddhahood, may seem very far away, we should hold that as our kind of final goal and recognize that we are going to take many steps along that path. That's the sort of decisive conclusion that we are striving for, but we have to do many things in order to get there. So in this way, this kind of second level, this medium scope contemplation says, I am going to make an effort to extinguish my afflictions, to gain this kind of liberation, and strives in that way.
Oh yeah. Ngori tindi tu tanga zu de samlo ro ko le tendo tarase samlo de ko kagurwa da de ko le samlo tangora kewa thoma mebane tangara to nyandi ora kewa shebe gyundi che da gyundi ma che che mida boina ko gyundi tu je ru ora kewa thoma mebane che nyawa che ne sekbada chawada tawe tunge nyambada chivi seri to bada kaje tunge nyaya shira ta mebe chi nyang chara mao bana tanda tu nyang de re sa ta mebe tanda na shin ten tu nyang je de ro ya mere che ke ya ten ro le ke chi le chi sa re tu bi che nya wa le ke ya cha da tu nge nyo che ro o tu che de re samna simba ya bo che samna ta ne ke wa thong ma me tanda ba tu nge nyo de re tanda mao bana tu nge nyang je ka ki to ye da ten ro me ke chi sa re tu re tu nge ma bu do tu se de ko na kali khabura samutana se tu yere chi omaro tine kar so re o tile chi taro chi che chi yore sam nangba ke ta juda ken ten yongu ara tezu kanga juda ken ji yone tine yongu ma do gyumi kemil yo maro shenda chi songe su yo maro ta bu cha san che che kinde ko judi ka so na debu de kaya yore sam judi nyomo da nyomo go ga sa be le de re sam nyomo de pana ane te keba seba de koba lemba se ba nga jota chu namjune shinge sonda ya keba seba de koba lemba se kowe ne da le de so le seba chi do wa mendre seba de cha de yang si la ga so shigala mo nga chi de le do chi seba chi yo de zu ma de na sa e ma ba ne yong ju de nga yang ja chi ke chi she tu ste yo na sa seba chi do wa ti ke che ne le le se de kyo lang go ra 다음에 봐도 동반이다 그 내를 longe 강가에 신자 총을 치수는 세바데 용거 말아 세바데 매나 그 레요나야 그 거기와나 요 말에 사베 주 사베 요나야 사kambuche 사베 요나 추던 류매나 사베 요나 그 누구께 요 말아 어때나시 랜덤만 통만면서 사셔 요나야 세바데 매나 께 출루 매나 시려 걔도 아니 거기와 랭게 요 말에 소소를 라와요 버체체 일루시에든 제 요르도 어디인데 남중간주 또또 삼루탄에 딜리 규진지 요아레서 저 통만 매번에 텐데 냐데 버려서 삼루탄은 소소소소 이팜코야시오라 어디가 이나요도 랜데 멜로코에 동에는 양양 삼나 치메나셔도서도 레레 때는 괜히 동에 녀네 거제 동에 녀래 삼티 삼루탄나 아니 저 치마 화담 미께 하세요 tenreda ko tendu pae samlut ko do oti ya tichilana ko tungedi ya samlut ana tenrega samlut ke tu yo rese nga zo ko ya de ko yu za judi pana ko den do yo re samtin de samlut korto wache wo ra ya tichilana
So here to have an understanding that there is a kind of definite freedom from the sufferings of samsara, this is something that we have to establish for ourselves, that it's actually difficult to do. We need to recognize that there is a kind of continuity to this, to our own consciousness, in terms of, although it is perishing moment to moment, nothing remains statically. There is this kind of momentariness in which there is a continuity. So we have in the past taken countless previous rebirths. And if we think about all of the kinds of sufferings that we experienced in the past, like how much have we already suffered in all of those various prior rebirths? And if we are to continue in this way, how much will we continue to suffer? How much hunger and cold and thirst and all of those various types of suffering? So there's so much suffering that is sort of like yet to come for us if we don't change the kind of trajectory or change the sort of causes that we are creating. If we really think about it, it's almost unbearable, the kind of suffering that we will experience in the future. So here we need to establish that there is a possibility to actually get to a kind of liberation, that we can attain liberation. So Buddhists assert that everything is causal. There isn't something that will come about causelessly. And so our suffering within samsara has a cause. And so too, if we remove that cause, if we get rid of it, then the kind of process that comes from that, the effect that comes from that will be stopped as well. And so all of our process of rebirth comes about due to causes and conditions. So particularly we have the kind of fundamental ignorance, and in the 12 links of dependent origination, we have the 8th and 9th links of craving and grasping. So at the time of death in particular, there's a kind of craving for existence. This is what helps ripen those sorts of karmic seeds into a future rebirth. If, however, we, through the development of wisdom, realizing emptiness and so forth, we get rid of that fundamental ignorance, that kind of seed is now bad. We don't have the ability to bring about further rebirth. So like if you have a seed that has been burned or otherwise destroyed, even if you have all the other conditions, it's not going to bring about a result. And so too, if we have gotten through, if we have gotten rid of the cause of continued rebirth, the sort of result won't come about. So here, this is, as Jelam Tsongkhapa has said, that it is by repeatedly contemplating the kind of sufferings of samsara, and particularly the process of karmic rebirth due to karma and afflictions, that we then turn away from the affairs of future lives. We gain this kind of renunciation, a desire for liberation. So it's by thinking again and again about the kind of suffering and the way in which we take rebirth that allows us to establish that liberation is possible and then make the kind of effort toward that goal.
Oh yeah. So 기부 돈도 도와다 돈다 숨버들어와 기분 정들어와 돈다 다 기부 첨부해서 딜레장 로야 자체로 친로와 닝dob체로 로와 어디들도 가르스나 다 란치부 코알에 타는 지금 메도 삼개월에 소수 첸디 파마다 다 소수 파마를 배 자와 첨부에 파를 쉐바 마드부질 자와 치시다 미 망샤데 말 자와 치시용 거라 디디 선제 탐제 마르쉐바 아셔 아 소수 첸디 마시다 땡기 매버든데 파를 자와 쳇든데 요라 파르쉐바 콤넨디 아 덴데 파마시다 마템베체 소수 첸디 가르소레 니엔자바 아샤세체 가리네야 면에 다가스미 로바친게 미치고 로바체 소수 메시 깡네 딘나시스 소수 첸데레 가리 진체 연나야 딘나시 마체베 요마레 삼고라 첸데리아로아 정부인한테 정부인한테 사상인한테 부부주인한테 부두범인한테 가르레 저와 숙체 연나야 디텐데 조르 딘나시 마주르 디텔레 저와치고라 담보 마르셰바 파르셰바랑 트로보셰바 트로모셰바 카르카리네 개치슈데 디나시 마주르 치냐요 마레삼 담보다가 네 동엘레 트와치고라 소수치부 동엘레 타네 데조 삼르치 마다나 만디레 삼고라 소세 파마라 소바 데조 동엘레 트와치고레 생가 데조 동엘레 트와치고레 데조 마르셰바 틴템바 카디쳔부레 삼 당부 마드치네 코베나 야디네 소디 자와요라 에티네 마케네 소디 체야소에 체크야 모랄 치카소레 네버 메마드 네버 지요나데 페트슨 소바 쉐비 소바 삼세 삼리오라 어디 인데티 틴데 소소 전달 삼리 틴데 삼부 장버레 상아덴데 초토베티 틴데 카테레 삼사로와 마르셰바 파르셰바야 조부셰바 조모르셰바 게겐셰바세 틴데 요레 게겐 베사침 쉐비치게시나 딘데 공예요 또 디체제 때때서 저쪽고 상태에 삼을 가셔서도나 천대 치부 방마 말에 교왕아마 땡아마 밀르다 시턴도 교알아서 가져라요네야 방마라서 딘데요라 딘데 삼을다데 심전디 방마제런디 갈 거딘 심부시다 제어런디 제어머서 은지 소소 체맹게를 차대요라 소소를 통대 로디 여게 메테주탈이야 나마 가르가르 소설 팬토 가르 네시가 수이자 이와치에 맹게를 차도라 디디치 마뉴 메베스로 트로부타 로바치 마뉴 메베스로 단데 기지표는 무엇인게 오마라 수수교왕함에 파마르지 트로부시오치네 단데 도바시 있게 되나 남미탄 그러고 정도 밀로타야 냐고라 콘도세네 어찌치 냐고라 저거 땡데 때문에도 아티고네 심제술에 소소 통대에도 졸이야 거진 대신 디마치 제면도 삼고라 교왕아마 제버데 제벌 쓰고라 신딜리 제버데 거디 제어와 교왕아마 나서 거디 제버데 제어되더라 어디인데 심제 탐제 라라 거디 제 파다 마다 녀다 녀도 조고 조물을 써고 부부부를 써고 마중게 신민디 제버데 마셔르세 예바체면도 삼고래 탐제 어디인데 탐제 동에도 제와 제통게 손에 야분도 아삼제 심제 탐제 동에도 들어와서 들에 이 심제 탐제수도 심제 강강 오신은 디디디스 tinde고 말에 tin데 로 장산 장되고 심제 인바 삼제 동에다 전도다 대화다 전도 용거래 가디 인하고 심제 인바 삼마도 내지지를 삼자 내 인하 강가 집어 그디 침부 장 인바더라 단다 인바 tin데 인데고 대완도라 동에 메데 심제 인바 좀 상말이야 그디 얘나 또다나 처와전에 되게 말에 템바 주구그레 삼사 삼로테 매제제레 삼사 삼로 내 얘나 파죠 마당에 니도 팬터보 주나 강가 단다레 삼 예와체게 메거레 삼로다네 바루체리아 대완돌라 동에 메데베 심제 인바 삼제 그디 얘나 팬터나데 디 삼로 쉽치부이고 디인데 심제 탐절을 미버셔야 되는 거라 심제 가레네 개발매버 지은 거라 디인데 심지어 탐제게 저 줍통게 소소면에르다 소소면에 탑다 시로니가 타르시네 랑도르기 내 강가 신게 상부 타르신바 신이 랑도르기 내 타르신바 상부 잠바다 자와라서 셴뱅게 삼로 상부 타르신바 딘데 강사진 교와 자기 인삼 같이 깔레 잡고나 겨도 마음바나 미유티 테라 인삼사 타제고라 소소게 유령부 상부 당고라 심지어 탐제가 줍통게 교육에서 연대 군대지 강사지 자기 인삼 산제지 고와 톱스 테라 그 강가 파사 미시베 몽바사 랑도르게네 미시베 몽바바사 차당 일이 차당을 소바티 파사 연대인 탑단 시럽 삼마파 개바체 텐데 미치 지기 삼겨라 기인도 단단해 소소 신경이 장야 있는다 견과야 있는다 산계지 고반 토베시도 지기 요삼 견나르 빵나 요 탐제 빵야다로 시시 직시나 강가 산계지 고반 토베 줄줄지스 마음바나서 닝 다번에 방을 샤고라 단다 톱투에도 요 말이 남산다 텐데 삼르치 코아체데 기부 쳔베 삼르스라 그래서 어디에 로 장내 들으지 네바도 지금 있음 내 단단해 고 지우 가요 충중지 팬도 제외나 심지어 탐제를 들리 팬도 봐 주지서 소화방법이나 심지어 탐제를 소화방 심지어 탐제 대화던데나 동해도 되나 동해 매배 대화도 만드나 삼자 근데 삼로 따시나 두두 대두 가가 쳐라 기부침비실 교토라 미 야가지도나 제수이라도 내가 고야부 표성서버도 따위야 삼사로 동해제지를 동해대 되나 삼사 말하자면 차도 지그라 야가지노 고야부도 나야 오면서 차도 지그라 드심 지그라 어딘데 매저 삼로 삼부 키지 신은 로셔드 쇼리 쇼생게 고 삼리 땅조래도 삼리 군주디 조래도 어딘데 심지어 탐제기 등 쭉퉁뱅기 그래서 연대 군대지 가사진 주와 자기 인삼 대전도 단단하게 쫀나리나 세바시기 연대 나리나 토바시 지조를 팬토바시 지기 인삼 내가 갱게지 지금 매 삼사 어딘데 삼로 숙침부 유리 무삼로 따나 텔레 장주 셈바서 장주 셈바 셈바 첨보세 장주 셈바 셈바 첨보세 라 심제 탐제였던도 삼로 땅에서 셈바 첨보세도 어딘데 삼로 땅 두고네 때 기부 첨보 삼로로 와 자 기부 돈다 투버 기부 돈도 토바 규발라서 돈다 숨도와 어디질람이야 만도체 다들
So that was the kind of contemplation for the being a middling scope. But to go sort of even beyond that, when we think about other sentient beings, to just pursue our own liberation alone is really not suitable. To pursue, though, this kind of great path, the great scope or the Mahayana, takes a greater kind of mental fortitude, a greater kind of resolve. And it begins by looking at whatever being it is. For us, if we had a mother, I mean, it's sometimes debated like, oh, is a mother's love greater or a father's love greater? It doesn't really matter. Whatever sort of being has shown us the greatest kind of love in this life. And it might not be a mother or a father. It could be for us someone like an uncle or a friend, whoever it was that has shown us a great amount of kindness. We should reflect on the fact that all other sentient beings have acted this way toward us in the past. It's not just that we had the sort of one a mother or friend or father, whoever it may be, who cared for us with kindness in this life, but rather it was we have had a being like that in all of our previous lives. So in this way, taking whoever it is that is most important, most cherished to us, we should recognize that other sentient beings have acted in that capacity toward us. Other than us not being able to recognize it, we can see that, again, a mother's love, it begins when her child is in her womb. She does everything that she can to avoid any sort of harm coming to that being. And not only that, once the baby is born, there's so many things that a mother does in order to protect us from harm, to try to benefit us, help us. So we should think about whatever being that is, whether it's our mother, our father, a friend, a teacher, whoever it is, we recognize their kindness and wish to repay that kindness. And see that however many other sentient beings in the world, they have all acted in this kind of capacity. Other than my not recognizing them as such, there is not a single being. I can't point to someone who hasn't shown me great kindness, who hasn't been my dear friend or my mother, or sort of my father, whoever it is that has cared for us. And so in this way, when we contemplate that all sentient beings have acted toward us with great kindness, there is this wish to be able to repay that kindness, wishing that other beings not have to suffer. We're able to generate this sort of attitude, thinking that may all sentient beings be freed from suffering. So here we are trying to develop this to the level where it's not partial or biased in any way, but just from being a sentient being, by just encountering a sentient being, we recognize their desire to have happiness and to be free from suffering and wish to bring that about. We ideally bring this to a level where there's no like need to connect it to ourselves. We don't have to think like, oh, well, that's my mother or my friend, but rather, oh, that's a human being or that's a being who experiences suffering and wants happiness. And so it's not right to harm them in any way. They are all just like me or just like my loved ones. And so thereby, it's not suitable to distinguish like some sentient beings as having been my friends or some as having been my enemies, but whoever it is, wanting them to have happiness and wanting them to be free from suffering. And when we really genuinely have that sort of attitude toward others, there's that wish to help them, to repay their kindness. But in order to do so, we need to have the kind of knowledge and ability to do so. And this is where we strive for that state of Buddhahood. A Buddha is someone who has developed all good qualities and removed all fault, knows without any sort of exception all of the points of what is to be adopted and what is to be abandoned. And based upon that, has the ability to thereby benefit other sentient beings. So here we need to again think long term. This is something that doesn't come about quickly, but rather is the end of a process of developing our own mind. Again, a Buddha has sort of awakened from all faults, removed all of those kinds of faults, and developed, expanded all good qualities to their highest. So when we are even like trying to remove one little fault or developing one quality, we should think that this is for that purpose. This is going toward Buddhahood, the development of all qualities and the elimination of all faults. If we really have this kind of attitude that everything that we do can become a kind of Mahayana practice, all of the sort of things throughout our day, if we're trying to get rid of one little faulty thing, or we're trying to develop one base of knowledge, one quality, everything that we do becomes sort of infused with that spirit. And so instead of like say our normal way of approaching things, where when we look at others who are say doing something that is good or positive, we might want to feel jealous rather than rejoicing for them. We need to shift our way of thinking, and in this way that our entire day can become Dharma. All of the little things that we do can become the Dharma. And so this is the kind of spirit of awakening, the mind of awakening. This is why it's called such a great mind, to have this thought, may I develop this all good qualities, remove all faults, attain the state of Buddhahood in order to be able to benefit all sentient beings. This is the really sort of powerful aspiration of a being of the great scope.
Give it to Toba Jubalas. Getting Dilla Pamba Maduna, Chindi and Juba College. Tatarenga to Militobate, give it Chungit, Joachima Havi Kovan to ya. Give it drink a tarba to ya, call it Tando Tarba, Yamo Sebe Sabara. Oh, Janik Kibuchimbo Sanji Kovan Toba Soba. Or did someone to read never you become Delia, Chinik to be in some door. Give it to Toba Jubala, getting Dilla Pamba Maduna, Chindi and Juba. And data with Tanjo Milu Caberson top shirt and Java Capdelia, to Matuna, Nichima Mambana Yanja, Talo Nyawita to do my Kiri Lesa Utena, Neda Shima, Tinde Cook to a Kawusita, started a cook of Caberson Toba, Delia, there's a truth of a Chevuresumua. No tea do Marato, Yiri Messina, Tirin Yemenal Shallet Sawachime, Chiniki Pemba to be in some, Joachim Malhada me. Kovan, Children, Caberson, Toba show some teacher, near Sendilia, Imundinalia, Shala Chaban, Chini Pemba to be in some Samlata. Oh, Titesa Mayba call it Tando Tarwach Chiguism, Tirin Yemenal Condo, Ajedan Trado, Kuser, Chardangi, some Lucazina, Yurutangi, some Condo Yurutangi, some Shinjan Yurutangi, Trado Yurutangi, Tarwatovas, Yamoseve, Tarwatovas, show some Tedesi, some Noah. The same jet and the Pember of Chuse Cheber and the Social Kulungitone, some jet Tumje Dewa, the Dewa, and Demba Chujiser and Demba Yanaya, Mahobana, some jet Tumjek, Tarchimba, Truptungege, Saji, Kovan to the Jurjism, and the Tandane, Kososu Kawatu with the teacher Lunga Shagora. And it about some Tana, some Church Yara and Dura. Another Samlutanga, Samlutanga Marwa, once a Yukshagra, Samurtana, so Yajan Royal, Comna, Ya Kone Conde Pay, Sembi, Newbury de Toa. Join the Pine Yorta, Yonde Marma, the Sosu Kumdichana, Comna Lord Major with the guy you may see door. Matin, don't that usually someone action. Did they tell you on the target Kiko Machana, did a liver shambit and did a Mumba shambit or so door. Tatari cook up the day to do so. Georgima Lami Kova, Church to be 10 Kabar Chachida, Tarvata Tamja Kimbatobe, Gucci San, which son of Chimatuna, cook up de Chola Tambenta, Dile Kubata, Dile Momba. Now this can social 10 messages and get Momba, Kuba, Tinde Jura, Nashi Chagres, and Dile Momba Shambete. Because the day Tawani June target Kiko Machana, Kawala come to Papa and Tapsi Machan Sura, Dile Momba Shambete. The Tawanya Juneta, the Tawanya Juneta, Dile Momba Shem, Dile Momba Shem at the Tandere. All this and that, Tanju Milito and Dikavata, Tanda Dembachi, Kibuchung, Drinship, Tanda Dembachi, Chine Chas, Sanje Kovanchi, Chine Tabacha, Techido, Chu Nenam June, Chu Nen, Tabacha, Chu Tanda, Samurta, Shebacha, Yana and the Kumdichi in some. Chunye Kuru set up the Sangura, or that didn't want to demand the love shamba. Yes, I need Chida Lamogoche. Oh, and it's Chunye Kuru set up the Samba shoes. Yeah, this one.
So right now, again, we have this kind of life. And as it says, if we fail to take this sort of favorable opportunity into consideration, or if we fail to make use of this, then how can we have this again? So here, we need to, on a daily basis, do as much as we are able to, thinking that, you know what, I'm going to, throughout my life, not harm others. I'm going to do as much as I can to benefit others in order to be able to get a good rebirth in the future. But recognizing that even if we are, say, born as a human, that still is within the kind of cycle of samsara. We should recognize that we want to try to get rid of those causes that lead to this repeated rebirth within samsara. So on a day-to-day basis, again, in order to secure this kind of situation again in the future, at the very least, we want to gain a good rebirth, but we also want to try to strive for liberation and the state of omniscience. And so to recognize the faults of our various afflictions and on a day-to-day basis, try to reduce them, like try to reduce our jealousy and our anger and our attachment and so forth, recognizing the faults in those and saying to ourselves, I'm trying to get to a state of freedom from those kinds of afflictions. And going even beyond that, we can think about not just our own happiness and suffering, but look at the kind of positive actions that we do and think, may this be the cause for the happiness of all sentient beings, that may it go toward the happiness and the cause of their happiness. And if we do this, all of our kinds of practices or all of our kinds of activities can become the practice of Dharma. What we habituate our mind to makes a huge difference. This is the quality of mind. As Shantideva has said himself, that there's nothing that doesn't get easier through habituation. If we habituate ourselves to these kinds of positive qualities, they will get stronger and stronger. If instead we allow ourselves to sort of follow after our afflictions, we don't use this opportunity wisely, then, as Shantideva has said, what could be more deceptive than this? What could be more delusional or stupid than this? To waste this sort of precious opportunity that we have. If we don't habituate our mind to virtue, we really are losing this most precious kind of opportunity. So we should think that we are going to use our precious human rebirth in a meaningful way, not just for a good rebirth in the future or our own liberation, but in order to be able to help all sentient beings striving for that state of Buddhahood, giving rise to this kind of mind of awakening. And with that sort of motivation, we are habituating our minds to positive qualities. So here it is by listening to the Dharma that we are able to really engage in those kinds of positive qualities, develop them further and further. And so with this motivation, thinking about that kind of long-term goal of Buddhahood, we should set our motivation for listening to the Dharma. And today I have spent a lot of time with a kind of introduction. We will go to the text more directly in the following following kind of classes.
Oh yeah. Tangan ju dine ma lo shana te. Kuju cham de yumba. Oh, rikpa tuju pa le jang kade yobar ma wa nam. Ngojo sune neba ne lamde nyela neba de tela. Ne kare. Yamzen chungse mese. Dine yimba. Ta ti godine te siya lo shana yabu yisara. Dine lo ya. Tena rangde ngwe ma wa nam ne sikdwa. Andi tenji debara juwa di shewi wa nga zo. Oh, tenji debara juwa se. Nangba sanje baga lule ya. Kanda nga zo salu jambe de kapsu tenji sonte yordan. Tenji debara juwa se te. Oh, ti. Ta tenji debara juwa di chiru baga sha shingi re shingi ma re rangde se. Nangba sanje be deba. Chira ma wa dan do deba dan sem zamba tazu ge sha shingi re shingi ma re se. Tenji ko le ya cheba chigi yora. Tenji debara juwa se te. Tena rangde ngwe ma wa namne sikdwa. Rangde ngwe ma wa namne tenjin debara juwa ma wa sanje be longla tenshin du yansi. Chiruba tuzu yina kurang tu lo so de tenjin debara juwa gyudan gen la tenne debu kewa sa ma re se. Jidengi cheba bo takwa yana chiso takwa chame tende chigi la tenne chunga re se shegi yora. Sa gyudan gengi nyurwa chenne tila tenne debu chunga di shegi yomare. Jidengi cheba bo chigi takwa tiya cheba bo diya takwa kurang gyumenge koso megunge shendagi. O tende chigi la tenne chunga re se shegi yora. O chiso tiyindi tenchen debari chunga di gyudan gengi la tenchen dene gyudan gengi pindi la tenne debu di chunga ma re se. Cheba bo shenda chore tiki pa so shaba re se shegi doa. Cheba bo de takwa chi shegi yora. Nangba sanje bo de kelingi yomardo. Kede chiribagi tenchen debari chunga di kelingi ma re se. Di korangi tembe lu re tili yamchanya ke yoma re se. Koranga chupta tende chi re se shera. Nangba sanje bo rangde nangba sanje bo tsangma sanje chungden de chenju sonza tenchen debari chunga ma wa yinde. Ane che tamje rangwe ne chuba nawa na shi tenpa yin se ke la ya te mandi bo re songwa ra. Ngo ma wa se nangba sanje be chuba ma wa la ya. Ngo bo tenpa chuba re, rangwa tu chuba yo re se, rangwe ne chuba yo re se ke lenge yo ra. Shira ma wa ta, do te pa ta sem chamba se, uma ba se chuba ma wa shi yo ra. Tande chuba ke che ra. Sa ngo bo ma wa, ngo bo tenpa chuba yin se, ma genge rangde tu su songwa yo ra. Tena rangde ngwe ma wa namne tenchen debara chunga sanje be lamla tenshin dosa. Sanje chumden degi shu tamche tenchen debara chunga re sa sungba tili ya ke lene, ti ke lene, tila tenshin dosi gora. Tenshin diya ngwe bo nam tingru ki ngo ni me bar ma uma tenju wa ki ngwe bo tenpa chube ngo yo ma re sa uma bo she gora. O tili ya tene soba chigi dosi o ti diga mara tingru yore se soba chigi dosi ra. Ngobo nam rangi ngoe chube tingru don de jen se. Ngobo nam tingru ki ngoe ni mebar mayo umaba nam la tso jen se o tenpa chuba me se de mandi re rangwan tu chuba yore, rangwan ne chuba yore se tso jen. Ngobo nam rangi ngoe chube tingru tu de jen se, ngobo tamche rangi ngoe chubire. So ngoe ne yore, tse na nye yuban diri su zu tsu sa chi yore, yu kuku re se yore. Ti nawa na shi tenpa chuba re se, nawa na shi tenpa yore se, nga ra towa na shi tenpa yore se yore. Tingru dun de se, lom de se, o tende kora lom ge yore, ngoe ne su le tende yore ma re te, tende sam ge yore te, sonza lomba sam re se, kora ge samba sam re se yore. Neba yinbe, di namne che ngo tsar shi mebe, ne su sung be se, o di mandikwa re so ra. Chiriba tozo ne nangba sanji korang chubta le tene, o tende tenshi debari chuwa ma re, tenpa chuba re, chu samche nawa na shi rangi ngoyo chuba, rangwan tu chuba yo re se, tenpa ma di korang lu re, yamchaya ke yo ma re se. Nangba sanji be tenshi debari chuwa sanji sungpa di ke lengi ya, ane ngobo nam tenpa me se te mandib re, nawa na shi rangwan tu chube, nawa na shi tenpa re se, di ya, karso de kele ba de mebe ne re se, Merata Nerese. Sumbe, Umabatana Randi, Mama Namja, Trave, Tende, Umabana Shichigana, Randi, Namba Sanje, Barangi, Tebasigo, no, to the Mother, Randi. And then Trave, Tende, the Kelling, Trave, Tende, Chishin Joe, Meshiba, Race, Lakua, Race, Gora. Trave, Tende, Chishin Sheba, the Chishin Mao, Maimba, Mako, some days. That Tende, some good to Usigora. The legendary Joagan, the Ninjura, take Netisha or Tissue, the Samsu, take Kuntangiora, Chesonga, Tangel Bules, Tangel Longtan. Mobona, Taban Debe, Chiruba Namse, Mobonam, Kiji Jurasing Marese, Tende Taban Devada, Roa, Mobona, Taban Debe, Chiruba Nam, Tende Kemelembe. Juda Ken Sokbala Tension Dren and Jebucho and the Marin Jignan Cheba Bochig, Ne Lu Lonju Sama Soyung Gore, Takma Chamichig, Soyungachi or Rese, or Tende Kelemba Sigora. Tende Kemelembe Chutemba Druban Devane, Rangatembe Louis Betsara name and Yamsaya Kayoma Rese, Shiruba Kuransone. You know, Jujila Tene Kishes, Namba Sanjeba, Sanjek Sumbanashi, Tutama Sugi. Wobo Kanga Juda Ken la Tene Kyore, Chebabu Takwachi Kebershinge Yomare, Songe Yomare, Tende Kelenge Suvisura. Eugene Tene Keshin, Joe, Tende Kelane, Temba Druba Devanese, Chenam Rawandu Truba, Ramune Truba, Re, Tinawana, Shingajuton, Temba Res and Devane, Che Shege Neso, so Dick Kemusha Nere, She Sonshins, that de Contangiora. Oh, the magic barriers, rounding my mouth, then the Kellingi, Nobo Rawan to Tribute, and do now and I sit by and said the magic barriers, then Gombulu to the song shots, Contagora. River to Jupaleja, get the Yobar Mawa Namse, Chiribasul Sigora, get the Yobar Mawa Nam, Mojo soon and Nebanes, Koranzu to the Chodu Jubashin and Nebate, Nebane, Mojo soon and Nebane.
Okay.
Do it.
Antatiso.
Mezzo essere. Bisogna. Namdi nila neba de titane la gumare sena. Don't do me. Lamdi nila neba de tele yamze chunse mese. Chiruba zogo koran zogo lokso reese. Ngobo nam rawa du tuba yo reese. Judan ken la tene lubur du gyugin sokwe tenji debari jo amarese. Jikden buki cheba bochi ki takwa chami chi ki soba reese. Ya yana wanju ki soba yana chiso la soba. O tende chi tuki yo reese. La tele yamchen yo marese. Ina namba sanje baga tupda ke lingi ya. Tenji sanje chumden dega sumba nangshe. Tenji debari jo wa ke lenshendo. Ngobo temba tuba yinse. Nganju tonga nashi temba tuba reese. Ate o de mandriba reese wara. So ben nam chosong ne neba kanye te me to se mebe ne res she song she se tandi tonda de namba sanje po tension de bar jo se de ke chim se yora tension de bar jo se kora timu mai be ke che ke nyelen je kyuta lenje che ke sin yora kora re do kyudele ya nyelen ke yosegra sabyon de che na ko nyu ke sabyon de nyelen ke yoro Chuda, Luda, Druda, Sherla, Soba, Tezukanga, Tenji Chikirwa, Teda, Nyelenta, Lenchi to Tele Robachania, take you in Sobalten, Kikuara. Sangobo Tamja Chibare, Rangi Kutan Kenla Tene, Kusitu Nyelen Kudesigra, Kensi to Tele Robachan, Lenji Chikin de Sigora. Chita Nyelenda, Ganga Kuyin, but the Radarwa, ina gyudan kyensi de gyudin yelenche, drebude lenji chekenche, o tindele teni kyeku resi gora, gyudan kyenle teni kyeku resi. Ti inde, rāng-rāng timu mayimbe gyudan kyenla teni kiki yote, rāng-rāng timu mayimbe gyudan kyenla teni ko chubkude, shanda chiki wangyu cheni kyede yohamaru yungu marwa. Jidengi ne yinanda, zabulindi yinanda, lu mendra, kyawa mendra yinanda, longje mendra yinanda, desu tsangma tamjete, jidengi chebabu takbachi yuwa se, o kongi cheshaba seba se, chubta shichu yuwa o tina shiki nangbe kelengi umara. Rāng-rāng timu mayimbe kyudan kyenla teni kikiri mato, kanga songengi takbu wang sama yungi chigi, di kanga soyachi yuwa se gora. Di kanga soyachi yuwa ta Kurāṋ rīkpa mebe samjidi she gora. Ti nāni songe de kanga yakbu kyangya somme shakare si gora. Tukbu tezu kanga soku meduwa si gora. Mokru mokila sokpa ta simchenla kiwa sangye da tezu kanga soku meduwa si. Tezu kanga soyani karchigre si. Ti chiba poli tindi wangcha yunge chi yuwa na da. Kutsewa yunge chi ingire kanga yakbu mada tukbu soku mada si. Ti sonza ko jiten cheba pu cheba te kelengi omare. Kaala tene chungare so laya da, so laya ki wangi, laya sangi ki wangi, dewa da tungi kiwe shi, naya da lu da longche la soba tukui ware si kora. Titu dan dewa yuwa chi sonza ko dewa nyoya da tungi nyoya ki chane, laya sangbu da ngenpa cheba li tene rang dewa da tungi kyu chane tukui re se. O di si kora. Na.
Ringtarisha. Yengatis gyurgorero.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so here, then, yeah, gonagan, it is gyurgore. So here then, turning to the text, and this is on where we are picking up is on page 57 in the Tibetan text, and then this is going to be on page 61 in the English text. So here again, we are talking about dependent origination, or things being dependently arisen, in the sense that this is something that Buddhists assert, as opposed to those kinds of non-Buddhist schools who would assert that there is something like a sort of creator God, or something that is permanent, or a sort of general principle, or time, or something that acts as a cause for the kind of external environment and the beings within it. So dependent origination is really important for Buddhists. This is an essential point that so here I'm going to pick up on page 61, where it says that for the Essentialists, the dependently arisen nature of composite for Essentialists, so here when we are referring to Essentialists, this is those kind of Buddhist schools who like the Vaibhashikas, the Sutra school, the mind only school, that while they assert that composite phenomena arise from causes and conditions, they assert that phenomena are also truly existent, whether that is external phenomena or like the mind in the case of the mind only school. But they would say that the phenomena are composite phenomena are based upon causes and conditions, but yet they are somehow truly established. So here at the bottom of 61, where it says then, thus, while Buddhist essentialists rely on the Buddhist path that propounds dependent arising, they in turn critique the Madhyamakas, who assert that composite things lack a truly established essence, and they stand firm in their proud assertion that composite things are truly established and exist by way of their own essence. So here, although the Buddhist essentialists assert that there is dependent origination in the sense of composite phenomena arising from various causes and conditions, and thereby negating the idea of some kind of a creator god, like Ishvara or something, or some sort of principle, a causal principle, like the Samkhyas would assert. They then in turn say that things are truly existent in the sense that they exist in the way that they appear. And so here, when Buddhists talk about dependent origination and things arising causally, there are two important factors. We often use the term cause and condition interchangeably, but when we say causes and conditions, really the cause is referring to a substantial cause, and the conditions are referring to those sort of coordinating conditions that bring about that. So again, we can't have something that is produced from just a single cause. There must be a substantial cause and those kinds of coordinating conditions. And for Buddhists, they would say that the external environment, as well as the beings within it, as well as their sort of relationship with things as feeling pleasure and pain and suffering and happiness and so forth, all arise due to causes and conditions. And so this to assert that there's some sort of one creator God, a permanent creator God who creates all of these things, there are many logical flaws to that, like having a single cause, or there being a permanent kind of a cause, and also the sort of logical absurdities like, well, if it's a creator God that's supposedly in the nature of love, why are they giving things that are suffering, like famines and wars and so forth? If this creator really is all powerful and they are in the nature of love, it would seem that that contradicts the kind of things that occur within the world. And so here, Buddhists would say that that is not possible. However, then we're getting into the understanding of dependent origination within Buddhists. So continuing in the text, it says, for this reason, according to the Madhyamakas, Buddhist essentialists do not precisely understand or competently propound subtle dependent arising. So the Madhyamaka position is that these essentialist Buddhists do not actually understand subtle dependent arising. And Gelama Tsongkhapa makes this clear in his Essence of Eloquence, where he says that it is not at all surprising that non-Buddhists who assert that composite things are permanent do not accept dependent arising, and therefore assert that phenomena are truly established. This is their teacher's position. So those kinds of non-Buddhists, they would say that yes, there is some kind of real true essence to things, or that the composite things are permanent. This is what our teacher says. However, it is absurd to accept, on the one hand, dependent arising, wherein things arise and are produced in dependence on causes and conditions, and on the other hand, to uphold that phenomena are truly established. And so this is similar to what is said in Master Nagarjuna's quote from 60 stanzas below that says, when the non-Buddhist proponents of true existence abide by clinging to truly existent things as superior, there's nothing to be surprised about, for they live by such a path. That's what their teachers have said. However, those who rely on the Buddhist path and propound the impermanence of all things, but in debate take the position of true existence and hold to it, are deplorable. So here, this kind of assertion is that for Buddhists who propound dependent arising, to then in turn assert true existence of phenomena is contradictory. It's sort of a deplorable kind of a position. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh, some years are mambuchi. Oh, lots of Chimane Mambu loves on a Jurgas loves you.
Yeah.
Some years to the oh yeah.
He's saying that sometimes he gets distracted and I need to tell him to stop. To translate.
Oh, dear. Yeah, don't do so. The Koramba Chimbe Janse. Tangen Delia de Carsura. Big Cabato to Sunzu Medamenda or Titsu Kushara. Did under Saja Cabachabuchera, Kunji Koramba Sugura. Kongi Carson do Sena de Son Shas, etc. Kunji Koramba Chimbe Jan Chiruba Namne Tenje. Tende Ke Melension is Chiruba Tende Kelling Maris. Rendezvous Mawa Nam Tende Mawa is Rendezvous Mawa. Semjamba don't do the Bachida Mawa to Sama. And the Tende Mawa to Rete, Tende Chishima Mares, Son Shas. the Tendi Chishin, Dogba Mayimbar Stone, Chishin, Haku Mare, Shingi Mare, say, Kedu Rumbuchin, say, Kedu Rumbuche, Kilubache, Assessum, Kedu Rumchira, Dina, Dilan, Sunju Mendar, Cherumuchin, Suna, Shichani, Tiramare. Sometimes Sunju Mendar to Mania to Dal, Sungu to Akon, Kebachi, in Aya, Susupiche, Nalia, Shunchi, Devashandachi. Shungshendajina Tilaka Wacham the Timar and the Shares of Yungora. Tikaris no Sunsu Mendra Yovade. Kualenda Mendra Yovate Manyam Chito. Yatina Kipu Mashav Shendati shares Losuchitoa. Tina Shin Kidu Rumachin. Tina Cherumuche Lomarawa. The Shishachi Sungiot and Lika Stos Mendaristua. O Kedu Rumbuchin, Tondun Lease. Tendegi tenji tingi chochu ni ngobo nam gyumido mawar deba matoba shenam ji ngoro trupsimbe trup mego la se. O ketu rinpoche nyugu choche tenpan mete tende imbe chirse tongpa nyi trupe taku gurwa. Nyugu choche se rawando trupe tenpa nawa nashi tenpan mete se tende imbe chirse taku gurwa. Chadang nyugu tende imba te chokshu trupsigra, nyugu tende imba shene, tenpa trupa ina mena nyam tezum sasuna tela chokshu trupsigra. Tayanda lea chusum trupsigra chor tina ni chokshu. Tende ko chokshu trupsara shiruba tozuke nyugu te tenjin reban jo imba togu re song sha song yore. Oh di, tongdi lea se. Tende ki tenji tenyi ki ya chokshu ne ngobo nam gyumido Kewaran Deva Madoba, Nobu Kumito Kese, the Tanjamba Mare Gase, Tampimbarwa, Tampimba, Nobu Samala Kuyo Mare Sigora. Diana Tico Tampingi, Pecha Shun Shimushita Lemedo Atanda, Kande Mune Karasunika, Tambo Kitu Kumese, the Sigora, Tambo Cheba Buchishani, Tigi Cheveresi Sigioma, Conjiden Chebabo Kelingomara. Tuke yomaran zambuli kora ranshingi tagas tubi yore sigora tambu tuti kichere. Mato ta chema ko shinga tabdi tu yomare si jangbimba shingba mambu yure kanga nyete yiji marwa. Ko shinga tondo tab yagu chene mato kiga mare samsan tengirwa. San ko ti kande sigi na tende mishe. Namyu nganzo jangbi kyumi tu mawa si tezi kyume sigire sigora. Ta tsawe ko gyu yomare si ti sigira. Jiden cheba bo yomare, songen jitsu yomare, suchi yomare, Koran ranshingi tsutub yomare sigora. This season. O chezang ngobu na gyumido ma gewara debe mato ba shenamji ngor tubsimbe tende di tubare jambimba mato shenda kanga tende shingire songura. Tu mego la ase. Ya tiba tu chilana.
So here, then what follows is kind of laying out some of the various positions of great masters of Tibet. So again, they will have slightly different ways of talking about this. So here, similarly, the great Gorampa, the Sakya master Gorampa, said that although non-Buddhists do not accept dependent arising, and Buddhist essentialists are proponents of dependent arising, the latter do not comprehend dependent arising precisely. So here, there are those Buddhist essentialists, and again, this is referring to Vaibhashikas, Sautrantikas, and the mind-only school. And he would say that they do not assert or sort of comprehend dependent arising precisely. So that's his way of positing this. And then we have the position of Kedrupje, and Kedrupje is one of the spiritual sons of Je Lama Tsongkhapa, but we can see here that he doesn't always just take the position of Je Lama Tsongkhapa. They have slightly different kinds of positions. We can even see sometimes, like within different a single master's different texts, there are different positions that they present, and this is or like there are slightly different ways of saying things, and in order to preserve that, we see that these appear in different texts. So here, Kedrupje then says, however, says in his Dose of Emptiness, except for those who assert that composite things are produced causelessly, all other philosophical systems are already aware of the presence of the reason in the subject in a syllogism that uses the reason of dependent arising. Thus, there is no need to establish it for them. So here he would say that for those other than those who assert some kind of causeless production, everyone who accepts that phenomena arise from various causes and conditions already understands the presence of the reason in the subject of a syllogism. So say, for example, you say, a sprout is not truly established because it is dependently originated. When it comes to, and there are the three modes of a syllogism, but the first of those is the presence of the reason in the subject. So here, this is understanding that a sprout is something that is dependently originated. And so other than those who assert causeless production, and we would usually refer to those charvakans or those kinds of hedonists. And here, it's not necessarily that they say everything is causeless, like, oh, you don't need to do anything in a field because it just arises, like we don't need to plant our fields and do that, but talking about the origins of like the universe, the world, as being causeless, as not having some kind of creator God that brought that about, it being sort of spurious or adventitious. It's not necessarily asserting that there's absolutely no causality. But so here, K-J's way of saying is that for even non-Buddhists, they are already aware of the presence of the subject, or sorry, the reason in the subject in a syllogism involving dependent origination.
Oh yeah. Tande sheda penje shagya chonde je jan de sondis. This sajje keba chambchira. Sajje je konge dende song shas. Tenjin de jo songba ne jiden mudi chala ya yeje hajan tajo de gyulen de jo shechiros. Tande tenjin de bar jo ade jiden mudi ba chiru to zola yo re se gora kelengre songora. Yeje hajan tajo de se. Tende ma de namba janja re Sanje chomden de la tende ma de pet kera timu mai bere se te bata sun bandi bere songora. Teje de ju songba ne jiden mudi chala ya yeche. Ya hajan ta kera te hajan ta wa ta sanje ma do yo ma re shenda so yo ma se de mandi re songora. Julen den ju she che ro julen den de bu jong se konjo she gre se songora. She gyumile ke wara kelen be chiru ba ma do ba Shiriba namje kyan drebu nam kyule kewara to shin shebe. Tende tokba dan mawar sungbe chebar chashes. Shiriba ge tende togre magre se. Tende songsha tende to cheba chekwe re se gara. Kondo she simba tar se. Kondo she simba tar. Karina. Ya. Kujure piace regurva. Quando c'è simbadar, kujure piace. Tanti incere. This, that's all. Quando c'è simbadar. Ma non piace. Ma go this, that's all. Something I could do. Quando c'è simbadar, kama meju do ci sedera. Quando c'è ci sembra. Kama meju do ci sedera, kaju ki keba chimbuchira. Kama meju do ci kaju keba chimbuchira. O konge ranshen ge tebe tashi kanru ge kewa kelen bata. Ran shen su rande ngoma da chiruba to sungora. Ranshen ge tubda ma tebe se tashi kanru ge kewa Kelen bata, tashi se chora. Tale kewa, shenle kewa, nigale kewa, kumile kewa se shishegra. Tashi. Tale mayin shenle minse, tale kewa yo mares, shenle kewa yo mares, nigale kewa yo mares, kumile kewa yo mares, tashi kewa meba sungora. Kumbulutu se. Dinde kama meju toche ranshe ge tebe tashi kanru ge kewa Kelenbadas. Chiribazo, Taki Kelengro. Number Sanje Bala Shenji, Tagisana, Randa Dani Chigbe Ju, Chito Sole Kevadela Tagisigora. Judan Drebuni Dani Chibochen Kesiora. Number Sanje Bala Judan Drebu Dani Chibochen Keromara. Dale Kewa Yose, Chiru Transjebata Shandura. Shenji Sudu, Number Sanje Ba, Mama Tozo Shana Dure. Rangwini Trube, Kushen Letten, Drebu Shen Kewa Yose and Gedele, Shenji Sigore. Shen le Kewase. Shen Yimba Sam Drebu Kewa Sigmara, Rangwini Trube, Kushen Letten, Drebu Shen Kewa. Chetsonga Bata, Tazu Shebana Shicheneruda. Maritandi, the Kama Miki Dojo, Ranshen Tebe, Tashi Karungi Kewa, Kelen Badas, or Taji Kelenge Chiruba Shera, Shengi Kelenge, Namasanje Bawa Mauchiora. Nigale Kewa Kelenge, the Chirubati Shara, Chirubati. Kumile Kewa Kelenge, Jambin Bayaba, Kumeva Cures, Tashi Kewase. Dale mai shele me nil mai ki mo kanda kana kyo na yo tashi kyo pa ka yo ra ta je ka ru ji kyo ta je ka ru ji ta wa khe le ba ta da ne ten de ma wa ya ma yin la sa tashi ka ru ji kyo khe le ge so ten de ma wa ma yin so ne ka ma me ki to che ga din na shi ta je ka ru ji kyo khe le ge de ten de ma wa ma yin so ta je se na Ninga Sawa Shirikoso, Kangi Tension Dojo, Gakwa Meba, Kiwa Meba, Cheva Meba, Ta Meba, Oa Meba, Dro Meba, Tadetemi, Tunjime, O Disigora, Gakwa Meba, Ubu Kiwana, Tu Gane, Debu Kikuara, Tu Gagba de Yomares, Debu Kiwa de Ramune Kiwa Yomares, Gakwa Meba Kimeba, Cheva Meba, Ta Mebas. Tauto neba de yo mare, cheba de yo mare sigura. Cheba meba, chendo eve. Tagba meba, cheba meba, ta meba. Hoa meba, dro meba. Chochi ne chochi do hoa dan dine pandroa. Yule to ten dro ni sigudwa. Yushochi ne chito tsuruwa dine pandroa sara. Yule to ten dro ni sa. I didn't bother you, Shamata. Tade to me to Jimmy, Rango, Chick the Tade Nisu Shine, Chick the Batuba Yomare, Tade the Batuba Yomares, Tisonwa. That is Ukanga Tembatu and Deva in any Taki Karu Kyo Kelly Giora. Tashikyo Karuji Kyo Kelly Bata, Taki Karuji Kyo Kelly Batadane, Tendi Mawaya, Mahila Tungi Mawada, Ume, Lamawaya, Mahimba Sun Sos, or Tibatu Chilama, Di Karsode. Tashida Takiesode Kawa Rangune Yore, Gaba Rangune Yore Station Takia Mount Chagdwa. Tantan di Shirakasu, Yoma Risungora. Yeah. Yes, I.
So here then we have a quotation from the Penjin Sakya Choden, who's a famous Sakya. And so here he seems to take exception to the idea of praising the Buddha based upon his kind of uniquely teaching dependent arising. So he says, even the worldly non-Buddhists speak of dependent arising, for they say that effects arise from causes. To deny this would be absurd. So here he is basically saying that even non-Buddhists accept an idea of dependent arising, and thereby it sort of it would seem to contradict some of those masters who choose to praise the Buddha particularly for his teaching of dependent arising. So thus it is said that except for those non-Buddhists who accept causeless production, non-Buddhists also understand and explain that effects arise from causes, and thereby and therefore comprehend and propound dependent arising. So the way Geshe-la has put it, this requires some examination. So then we turn to the view of the master Karmapa Mikyo Dorje, and he is a famous Kagyu master. And here he has said Buddhists and non-Buddhists who accept production from any of the 4 possibilities or any of the 8 possibilities are not proponents of dependent arising. In addition, they are neither proponents of emptiness nor proponents of the middle way. So here, anyone who would assert some kind of production from usually we say the 4 possibilities or the 4 extremes. This is as it occurs in the very first verse of the root verses on wisdom. Not from self, not from other, not from both, not from no cause has anything anywhere ever been produced. So here, to assert some kind of production that involves production from self, as in something having the same sort of essence or nature, the cause and the result have the same essential nature in a kind of an inherent way. This is something that, for example, only like Samkhyas assert. No Buddhist school would assert production from self. There are, however, those Buddhists who assert some kind of production from an other, an inherently existent other. And so if there is something that is existent from its own side, that is the kind of production from other that we're talking about here. There are those I believe it's the Jains who assert that there is some kind of production from both self and other. And then we see that there are those who assert that there are from neither, or some sort of causeless production. So if someone is to assert any of those extremes or possibilities, they are not proponents of dependent arising. Same if they assert some kind of production, and the 8 possibilities here is referring to those that are listed within the homage from the root verses or the fundamental verses on the middle way. So here, wherein Nagarjuna is praising the Buddha for having taught that dependent arising, in which there is no production, no cessation, no annihilation, no permanence, no coming, no going, no sort of singularity, no multiplicity, this sort of pacification of all elaborations. This is his praise to the Buddha. This here, again, if something were to be sort of produced or exist in one of these ways in which it were inherently annihilated or inherently had some kind of permanence, inherently were produced or inherently ceased, those kinds of proponents, he is saying are really not proponents of dependent arising. If you accept one of those kinds of categories wherein there's sort of dependent, production from its own side or from some kind of inherent cause.
Oh yeah, that is also, yeah.
So we'll stop there for today as the time is up. Thank you.
Oh yeah, thank you.
Uchiche Rinpoche. And thank you, Katrina, for your very skillful translations, as always. And for those who are watching online, we hope to see you again next Saturday at 8 a.m. Pacific time. We'll finish with some prayers. May the spiritual teachers who lead me on the sacred path, and all spiritual friends who practice it have long life. May I pacify completely all outer and inner hindrances. Grant such inspiration, I pray. May the lives of the venerable spiritual mentors be stable, and their virtuous actions spread in the 10 directions. May the light of Losang's teachings dispelling the darkness of the beings in the 3 worlds always increase. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam
Oh yeah, thank you.
Due to this merit may we soon attain the awakened state of Guru Buddha, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their suffering. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore.
Oh yeah, thank you.
Dunda Jema Jeongen.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. Good. Oh,